The first name that comes to mind when you think of the actress from the golden age of Hollywood that most exudes grace, style, glamour, talent, and a giant heart is Audrey Hepburn. Even today, more than 90 years since her birth, the world is still enamored by her. I painted a portrait of the Belgian-born beauty because of my own admiration for her. I was lucky enough to get the chance to have a conversation with Audrey Hepburn's granddaughter, Emma Kathleen Hepburn Ferrer. Emma, like Audrey was, is an artist and a humanitarian. I think you will really enjoy hearing about her, her art, as well as her views on her grandmother, Audrey Hepburn. Hi, Emma. I'm so excited to be meeting you and to be having this conversation. I have a lot that I want to ask, so I thought we would just begin by having you introduce yourself and talking about your artwork.
Just a little bit about me as a person. My name is Emma Kathleen Hepburn Ferrer. I was born in Switzerland, where I lived for the first few years of my life. And then I moved to LA, where I lived as a kid. And then ever since I was about 11, I've been living back and forth between Italy and America. I just spent 6 years living in New York, and last year moved back to Italy in a really small little village where I, essentially grew up. And so that was a huge change of pace, and one that I'm really happy about. But more about my art. So I guess you could say that I always drew and painted. I was always drawn to it, doing it extracurricularly, doing it at home, trying to take classes wherever I could. And then when I was about 16, 15 or 16, I started doing like intensive summer courses. So I did one at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, of course, and one at Pratt University, where I would be there, taking university level courses for 6 to 8 weeks at a time. And that was really the first time where I was completely immersed and absorbed in, a primarily artistic environment. Coming out of high school, where I was fortunate enough to actually, be able to take art classes frequently. A lot of kids aren't as fortunate, but that was really like a very kind of, fully immersive experience for me, those two experiences. And that's really when I realized that I wanted to do it full time, that I wanted to be painting. I consider myself a painter, whatever that means. To me, it means something specific. We can get more into that. But um, so yeah, and so I, kind of made a decision. And when I got out of school, I had gotten into, I was planning on going to Central St. Martin's in London, where I had been accepted. And then at the last minute, I took a tour of an art school in Florence that was a completely different institution. It's a very small private academy, where at the time, I think I was like the youngest, if not one of two of the youngest students who had ever been admitted to the full-time intensive painting program. And so I just when I went to that school, I made a complete shift, and decided that I would stay in Florence. I was living in Florence at the time, and embark on this incredibly rigorous educational journey of learning how to paint, with the techniques and the repertoire of the old masters. So it was, all studio work, very little art theory, very little, study time. It was all studio time.
Are you still incorporating the techniques of the old masters in your paintings today?
So yeah, so I got out of, let's see, it's 2021. So I finished school about 5 years ago, and transitioning into my own practice, has been, I speak in the present tense because it's still an ongoing process.
Yes.
It's been, quite an intensive kind of, new approach to try and transfer what I've learned in an educational environment to my own practice. But I would say absolutely, as far as materials go, and as far as, how I think about my work, I would say that there are absolutely elements of, of what I learned in, through my education. But stylistically, it's quite different now. It's definitely much more immediate and expressive.
Wow, that's all really interesting. And I'm going to be sharing your images of your paintings throughout this video. So let me ask you also, as I was researching more about Audrey Hepburn and about you, it dawned on me that you have a lot in common, that you're both soft-spoken and photogenic and beautiful women. But, what really stood out to me was the idea of creativity. And I was wondering if you felt a deep sense of connection to your grandmother because of creativity.
I mean, yes and no. I would say yes in terms that, in terms of, um, yes. I mean, my grandmother, apart from being an actress, and I'll get into a little bit more about, the her method of acting that I think is so particular and really sort of shows how much of an artist she truly was in a second. But she also was, when she was younger, loved to draw and paint. Yeah, and I had the chance of sort of my dad has put together this incredible archive in the form of an exhibition that's currently touring. It's coming to London soon, but it was just in Brussels and Amsterdam, and it's just a series of like family photos and photos of her when she was very young. And in this archive, there are also a lot of drawings that she did when she was young. So that was really amazing, touring it and seeing them for the first time in person, and a lot of drawings for the first time at all. And I also know that when she was younger, she really wanted to be a ballerina. And I was also, I also danced when I was younger. And those are both art mediums, if you will, that I think are a lot more introverted or lend themselves a lot more easily to, kind of like self meditation or kind of self reflection. Maybe, I mean, acting certainly does that as well, but there's this performative aspect to acting that I think is unique to that as a medium. So I would say that in terms of just having an artistic approach to life, absolutely. But I'm much more. I think I'm much more of an introvert than my grandmother was, and I've dallied in acting a little bit
Mhm.
here and there for fun, but never really. I'm a much more kind of solitary person, and that my lifestyle is just I feel much more sort of at ease and easier to kind of be with myself when I'm not in a performative space. Um, yeah. Oh yeah, what I mentioned before really quickly is that my grandmother, um she would really like study her roles when she was preparing for a film, and she would, it was, I guess, what you would call today method acting. But she would go, like, for example, when she was preparing for a nun story, she went and like lived with Franciscan nuns for 4 months and like studied their movements and how they dressed. Or when she was preparing for Wait Until um um Wait Until Dark? No, it's not Wait Until Dark. That's the Hitchcock movie. Yeah, Wait Until Dark. No. That's Wait. Yeah, yeah. It's Wait Until Dark. She would like visit with people, like blind people, and go to their homes or like into homes where they were being cared for, and like watched how they would pick out their clothes. And that really, because she was so involved also with her, with the wardrobe of her films, that like informed how she, chose textures over like shapes for her films. So I think she was absolutely an artist, for a series of reasons, this being one of them. So yeah, I do feel connected to her.
So you just said something that makes me want to jump to a question right away. And that is, I've read that Breakfast at Tiffany's was a role that was actually originally slated for Marilyn Monroe. And I wonder, in your opinion, what do you feel your grandmother brought to that role that was so unique and outstanding and memorable and so different from what Marilyn Monroe would have brought to the role?
So not, I'll add this to your little anecdote. Not only was she slated for the film, but Truman Capote actually wrote the story with Marilyn Monroe in mind. So the role was actually written for Marilyn Monroe. But we'll just like backtrack a little bit. Breakfast at Tiffany's is one of those films that, and I can vouch for this on a personal level, it's one of those films where you watch it at different stages in your life and it means something different to you and you understand it in a different way. I think, when I was younger, I just thought that it was this really cool, kind of like aesthetic journey of this young girl living in New York, and she has all these amazing clothes and these crazy friends, and then she finds love and there's a cat and it's like so cute and lovely. And then like when you get older, my dad was like, I think he maybe even like sat me down one day and he was like, it's about a call girl breakfast at Tiffanys or something, like, or we were I don't know, like it came up in conversation. I was like, huh? Like, I think I went back and watched it. I was like, whoa, I can't even believe this right now. So it's just, that said, like, it has so many layers as a film to it. And I think that is the subtleness of certain themes and of certain tropes and motifs in the film, I think are able to be so, powerful kind of in how subdued they are, like in their silence, because my grandmother wasn't the Marilyn Monroe figure of, this like very voluptuous kind of female embodiment of sexuality. I think that my grandmother had her own kind of sexuality in her own way, her own like sexual brand, if you will. But I think that she really interpreted this role in a way that just allowed it to have like so much more breadth.
Okay, well, let's jump to fashion since that is something Audrey Hepburn is so known for. Can you tell me about her kind of perspective about the wardrobes that were in the movies that she was in, and also about her relationship to Givenchy?
Yeah, it's like such a, such how long do we have to talk about this? I think that, she was one of the first female actresses to really accomplish like a list, a list of tasks that today are so much more commonplace in the industry. But she was the first actress to, like, along with Elizabeth Taylor, if I'm not mistaken, to make $1 million on a film. She was the first actress to really like have this combination of humanitarian work and developing countries with this very much more kind of isolated, insular cosmo of like glamour and fame and success and wealth, and really like merge those two worlds together on screen. But on that list, I think, is also how involved she was, as I said before, with the wardrobe on her films. And she would really work. I've read about this. There's the biography written by Barry Paris on my grandmother really sheds a lot of light on this topic for anyone who's interested in fashion and film. But she, of course, it was born with Givenchy, but she would really work with all of the costume designers on her films, from the beginning, like from the drawing board, from the imagination of who a character would become, the conceptualization of who a character would become, to, like being in the fitting room and like constantly, what my dad always says is that she was constantly simplifying the designs and constantly streamlining them. So maybe they would bring her a dress and it would have like a bow, and like she would want the bow taken off, or like there would be a zipper showing and she would want it taken down, or like she was always trying to make these shapes and these lines a bit more sophisticated. So I really think that it was almost, I mean, and I obviously say this with the utmost respect, I think it was almost kind of like an obsessive thing.
Mhm.
And that like extended also into the way that she was portrayed in the media, or the way that she allowed herself to be portrayed in the media. She had like a very, very close control over what photos were taken of her, where they were taken, who was taking them, how they would be published, where they would be published. There's really only like, of course, there are hundreds of thousands of pictures of my grandmother, but they're all carefully curated, and she had a role in that curation of her identity, of her persona, really. So she is the architect of Audrey Hepburn, if you know what I mean. Like, she kind of created that identity and personality, and projected it to the world.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And it sounds like it would be crazy difficult to figure out and navigate.
It's quite stressful probably
Oh,
too, right? To have this really curated image of oneself. And I think that's why she was always so hell-bent on keeping her personal life personal. She never wanted, in fact, there's like no bad gossip or bad media. My dad always says that like no one ever had anything bad to say about Audrey Hepburn.
Right.
I think that's largely to thank for what we just talked about.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. And as you described, sounds extremely difficult to navigate and very stressful. Okay, so let me ask you, did your dad ever tell you if your grandmother described to him what her relationship was like with her parents, and also what it was like for her to grow up during World War II?
Sure, and that's been, the hot topic of a lot of speculation in
Yeah.
recent years as, different interpretations and books and, biopics in the making and, have started coming out. And there was Dutch Girl and, there's just been a lot of like myth around who my grandmother's family was or in the time of the war. And I can tell you, so I'll tell you all that I know. Basically, so going back to when she was very young, her father, so she was born to Ella von Heemstra, who was a baroness, essentially, Dutch Hungarian royalty. And her father was an Irishman who essentially, abandoned the home when my grandmother was very, very young. So she grew up fatherless in this constant kind of search for who my grandfather, who her father was.
Mhm.
And that that obviously really informed or, shaped her relationship with men over the years, which was turbulent in its own right. But so I know that that male figure, my great great grandfather, I said grandfather for my great great grandfather. Um, he joined I'm gonna get it wrong, but I think it's the Silver Shirts, which was the English Irish fascist group.
Mhm.
Um, and I believe that at the very beginning of the war, as many, and I say aristocrats loosely because they were kind of in ruin at the beginning of the war and throughout wartime. But just as we can see with the way Hitler in Germany really, milked and charmed the aristocratic class, during his rise to power, just the way Mussolini did in Italy, I think that they really kind of fell under that spell,
Mhm.
um, not of right-wing ideology, but more of kind of what like really the birth of fascism was, which was a nationalist government that was interested in, economic revival and, cultural revival in a way, and equalization of class, things that, attractive political ideologies. Um, and then I think very, very quickly and this is not just, the tale of my family, this is the tale of like, so many families from that generation. And I think very quickly they realized, like when the truth came out, what, these personalities, Hitler and Mussolini, what they were really all about.
Mhm.
Also, like Tea with Mussolini is such a good film that really sheds a light on this exact process that I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know if you wanted like a whole political background, but that's
No,
how I'm
I
interested
don't
in
know. I'm
it.
super interested in it, specifically, what their perspective was at the beginning versus how that perspective evolved as the war, played out.
And so then, when the war broke out, it was like there could not have been a more drastic shift in mentality. And, my grandmother, I think her brother-in-law and cousin and uncle were all killed by Nazis. I can't remember if it was a brother-in-law or her cousin, were dragged to the woods and like literally shot dead by Nazis. And, my grandmother essentially survived off of bread that was made from tulips living in wartime Holland. And there's the myth that everyone loves. I think there is truth to it, actually, from what I know and from what my family tells, that she was very much a part of the resistance as much as a child can be. And she would go and perform, because she was still a dancer at the time. She would go and perform at these like secret kind of gatherings, like speakeasies, I guess. And she would bring like notes for the resistance in her shoe and like give them to, she would pass these notes back and forth between, between these figures who were part of the resistance. And yeah, and so they were like, her story is kind of parallel to Anne Frank. And I think that actually they were making a film about him and Frank, and like begged my grandmother to be in it, and she just refused because it was so close to her heart, I think. That she just felt, I don't know what the reasons were emotionally or psychologically behind why she didn't want to do it, but yeah, I mean, it was obviously a terrible time. And my dad says it, I don't know what the real story why she couldn't continue being a dancer was, but or she was too tall. A huge part of it had to do with the fact that she had lost a lot of strength and had almost died from starvation during the war, and never really regained it. And that's such a, for in the life of a dancer, it's like that is the age, when you're a teenager. That's like when your career is built, and if you don't do it then, there's such a short lifespan for the career of a dancer. um so yeah, I feel like I'm making my answers so long-winded.
No, not long-winded at all. In fact, it just shows how brave she was. And I'm wondering, did your father ever say if that strength and bravery was something that was ever present in her personality throughout her entire life?
I don't know, like my gut feelings, yes. I mean, it was so much so that, and I don't want to say to a fault because it's not a fault in the slightest, but it was so much so that I think certain mentalities really carried over. Certain like reactions to certain kinds of trauma, and certain like states of existence or survival. I think she was constantly in that state, um, which I think really contributed to what I was talking about before, her relationship with men,
Mhm.
in multiple marriages, and really, really, really unfortunately being treated poorly by a series of men.
Yeah.
Um, my grandfather, I wouldn't be put on that list, not just because he's my grandfather, but that's a whole other question. I feel like his role in my grandmother's life has sort of been unfairly interpreted in since her passing. That's a whole other conversation though. But her husband after that, Andrea Dotti, that's like a whole other thing. I'm trying to not like go in too many tangents. When they were married, he was photographed with like, I think literally over 300 different women, because he was a very, very affluent psychiatrist in Rome at the time. And he, like, this one paparazzo took the responsibility, like he felt it was his personal responsibility to photograph all of these different women that he was seen with. And when confronted with all of this adultery, he was like, oh, I'm doing research like on my women or something, like just terribly. She had a really hard time with men. And like also I think with food, and that's something that I've thought about a lot, because there's also so much speculation as to why she was so thin.
Mhm.
And my dad just says that it was like, constitution, and she just had the body of a dancer. And I think that's in part true, but I think that she also, and this also, this is something that my dad also says, I think that there was kind of a like a scarcity mentality that came from the war a bit as well. And also like a desire, to please. And I think a lot of like this feeling that she had come from where she had come, and then all of a sudden been given all this responsibility, and she had to kind of like please all these people or make sure that she was living up to the responsibility that she had been given. So I just personally think that a lot of that mindset was connected to the person she was in the war.
I feel like to some degree that happens for all of us, but for somebody like Audrey Hepburn, who had such major events happen so early on, like her father leaving and growing up in a war-torn country, that it would be tenfold or more the effect of it all. So, switching topics a bit, I wonder what made Audrey go into acting since she couldn't continue with dance. Why acting then? What was it about acting?
I think it was kind of like the next best thing at the time, unfortunately for my grandmother. I think it was kind of not what she wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, but I think she kind of had like the ultimate soccer mom of all times, who was my great grandmother, Baroness von Heemstra. Or Duchess von Heemstra. Oh God, I'm making that up. I don't know. Who really like threw her into this world where it was like, okay, that's not gonna work, on to the next thing. And I think she also saw this incredible star quality and potential in my grandmother, and in that also an opportunity not to milk off of it or to exploit it, but to like help her, like get some income going, to help
Mhm.
the family back onto its feet. And so, and then that was part of it, and then the other part of it was kind of just like luck, as it is in so many of these cases. She was spotted by whoever had written the book Gigi.
Oh.
Name. She was on holiday in like the French Riviera or something like that, and she was spotted from the balcony by the woman who had written Gigi. I hope I'm getting all these facts right. And
Mhm.
then Gigi was in the process of being produced on Broadway, and so she was like, "She's my star. She's going to be the one."
It's so
And so
crazy.
that was like, those moments, which are like, her screen test for Roman Holiday, which is, you can go like see if you go look it up on YouTube right now, where these producers kind of just like all of a sudden saw her. So a lot of like fortuitous moments coupled with, her talent, also paired with, wanting to have been a performer, wanting to have been a dancer, and that didn't work. I think
Right.
also finding herself to a degree with acting, which is also has a physicality to it.
Did she actually study method acting?
Honestly don't think she studied acting at all. I'm
Oh,
like,
okay.
that's another fact I might get wrong. I honestly think that she's one of those stories that every young actor just hates to hear. It's like she was discovered and she never had to study acting a day in her life. That's not true, I think. Of very serious studying on her own. But I don't know if maybe she like did a few weeks with like some acting coaches, to prepare for Roman Holiday, which was her first really big role, or for Ondine, which was the second big Broadway production she did. I don't remember if Gigi or Ondine were first. Um, but I don't think she was ever like, in acting school per se.
When you explain her discovery story, it's exactly how I would envision her being discovered. Just because I think of Audrey Hepburn as so effortlessly stylish and beautiful and graceful. So it only makes sense that she would be being herself and somebody would discover her as a star, at that moment. So moving on to when she was a mother, did your dad tell you what it was like to grow up having Audrey Hepburn as a mom?
I think she was very loving and maternal. She It's hard because my dad is always like, how, people have always asked him, how was that question exactly, how was your mother as a mother? And he was like, I don't know, she was just my mom, kind of thing. When he was young, he didn't really understand really. Like, actually, that's this funny, this thing just came to mind. I saw on Instagram this video of like Kim Kardashian with her daughter. I don't know if it was her daughter or her son, her child,
Mhm.
in a car with like all these paparazzi around her, and she's like, "Mommy, like, how come there are always so many photographs being taken?" Your dad is like an incredible artist and producer and musician, and I just have all these talents. I can't even get into it. It's like, I don't know. I thought that was just a cute moment that just popped into my mind, because it's like, like, why are all these people taking pictures of my mom? Because these people are just these kids, and more importantly than that, when you grow up, you don't understand that your immediate surroundings aren't normal. I mean, first of all, there's nothing that is normal. But whatever you grow up with, you just assume that it's commonplace. And so I think my dad had a very similar experience. I think now in sort of older age, and my dad's not old, but in later years in his life, he's realized that maybe she kind of always treated him as an adult, like even when he was a kid in many ways. I don't know how relevant that is, but um, I think that that's cool. I think that, there's a good and a bad side to that for sure. But that said, she made it like her goal to not be a Hollywood mom. So she would always like bring my dad to buy his uniforms at the beginning of school, and it would be like, okay, let's just buy like 5 shirts instead of 6 so we can save some money. And or when she was kind of motherly to everyone. Like when she, apparently when people would go and stay at her home, like she would always bring them breakfast and flowers in bed in the morning, or she would always make, like during lunch breaks on set, she would like very frequently make lunch for all the crew members on set. And so I think she was motherly, and she passed up a lot of roles too when she was a mom. And she was living in Rome, and there was a lot of social political tension at the time, and so she moved her family to Switzerland because there were a lot of kidnappings going on. And so I think she made a lot of sacrifices, a lot of big life decisions. And having had the turbulent family life that she did, when she was young, I think she really wanted to give her kids, like she wanted them to be the priority. And I think she did absolutely that.
When she eventually started working for UNICEF, do you know what drew her to that role and to that organization? When you describe her in such motherly and loving terms, it just seems like such a great fit that she would then go and work for an organization like UNICEF. I just wonder, how it played out, how it rolled out for her, how that happened.
Well, going back to wartime, okay, she was pulled out of her famine and out of her situation during the war by the Blue Caps or the White Caps, which was an organization that had been assembled by the League of Nations, which was the predecessor of the United Nations. I hope again I'm getting all my historical facts right. And that organization, which was an emergency committee or an emergency faction that had been assembled to go into post-war communities and like facilitate rehabilitation, both like long-term and also immediately, where there had been a lot of destruction and whatnot, to help these, as we see now, like UNICEF does, in war-torn communities. And so that that faction went on to become UNICEF. And so I think having been, I mean, she would always tell the story where she had been starved for all these years, and then this group, like, Holland was liberated, and this group came in, and like one of these officers handed her like a chocolate bar, and she was like, that was when she knew she was going to be okay. And that was like a lifelong affair with chocolate was born, or something like that, she always says. But I think she was, it was very, very close to her heart. And so it was important for her to be able to do exactly that for children around the world who, were in those conditions or even worse. And so it was something that was, conceptually and spiritually, I guess, if you will, close to her, very close to her.
Which brings me full circle back to you and your role with UNICEF. If you can describe what you do there and how you got involved and what it all means to you, it's just another great connector between you and your grandmother.
Yeah, for sure. So I started out with UNHCR actually. So this was in 2015, and I just remember during that time, it was the crisis. It was the height of the Mare Nostrum crisis, which was, the refugee crisis coming out of Afghanistan and Syria and other countries in Africa and in the Middle East, but primarily who were traveling by sea to get to Europe. And there were all of these extremely powerful images on the news all the time of, boats capsizing and like all these bodies washing up on the shore of Greece, Lesbos, even Turkey. And I just remember watching these images of these like children, washing up on shore and like face down on the sand and just these cadavers, and it was so powerful to me. And so I approached UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees,
Mhm.
and I became quickly involved with them, and we were able to allocate a series of donations. I was also working with Tiffanys at the time, and through, I did a couple of jobs for them, and instead of getting paid, I like allocated the donations to UNHCR, and then we were able to put enough money together to do a mission trip to Greece, to refugee camp in Greece, Idomeni refugee camp, um, and spend about a week there, just learning about the work that UNHCR does, auditing children's classes, art classes, and yeah, so that was really the first major thing that I did, and then came back to New York and just continued fundraising and sort of being a spokesperson for UNHCR and ambassador, and then I was approached by UNICEF because I was finally living in America. And they asked me to speak at an event, and it went really well. And so I kind of became, I did like the American circuit of all their major big donor events, and would just go to these events and essentially just talked about my grandmother's story and what that meant to me and what it meant to carry on a legacy and the different kind of work that UNICEF has done in recent years. They do so much work. It'd be so much to get into right now. But the breadth of the work and the research that they do and the progress that they're able to, and that they're able to instill around the world. And so, yeah, ever since I moved back to Italy and the pandemic was happening, it obviously my work was very public, or oriented in interface with the public. So that was put on hold, and now living in Europe. So um, we'll have to see what happens. Really, as people are starting to come back to in-person events now, I hope that, and of course, my dream would be to take a mission trip with UNICEF, which I'm certain will happen one day. I'm starting to talk with another organization that's directed by a close friend of mine, um, uh, Max Frieder, and he has an organization called Artolution, which basically brings large-scale community-based art projects to traumatized communities again. So essentially, the work that UNICEF does, but rather than being rehabilitative medically or educationally in the classic sense, they bring like these big art projects and involve the communities, which has a very therapeutic effect, and they've worked all around the world. So I'm starting to talk to them, which is really exciting for me, and hopefully that relationship will continue growing.
So, Emma, if people want to see more of your artwork, where should they go to find it? And if they want to get more information on UNICEF and possibly getting involved, where should they go to get more information on that?
Well, what I think is a really cool way of getting involved with UNICEF, and this is what I always say to people, it really is relevant to any organization. But if anyone wants to become involved,
Mhm.
um, instead, obviously, of course, donating money is an amazing thing that anyone can do at any moment of the day. But for I know a lot of people have different skill sets, both professionally and personally. Just as an example, my friend Polly Rojas, she is an actress, but she's also a public speech therapist. So she coaches people, in public speaking.
Mhm.
And so she will like donate her time every X months, to UNICEF and coach executives or coach, UNICEF employees who have to give public talks. So things like that, or like if you're like an interior designer, there's always the need for design for events that are happening all around the country. So there's just so many different ways that people can become involved that don't necessarily involve money,
Mhm.
that can just involve, or if you're like an artist, who knows, you could maybe give art classes, even if it's on a national level and not an international level, who knows. But there are people that you can reach out to specifically, and make inquiries about that. I'm sure, on unicef.org, there's just a list of like where you can send your email.
Okay.
If not, anyone can always get in contact with me
Mhm.
at EKH Ferrer, or just type in my name, Emma Ferrer, on Instagram. I check all my DMs. I don't always respond to all of them if I don't have time, but if it's something like this, I'll absolutely respond, and I can get you in touch with the right people if you feel like you have a skill that you can offer in terms of your time to UNICEF. Um, yeah.
And if someone wants to get more information, again, on your artwork, should they go to your Instagram as well?
If they are specifically interested in my art, it's going to be emmaferrer.com, my website, where most of my artwork is, not all of it, but most of it. And yeah,
Oh, great, great. Thank you so much, Emma. This was such a terrific conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved meeting you and I learned so much. Thank you.
so much for your time. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you.